Hello, Atlee. You can see my screen? Yes?
Yes, perfect. And the
Perfect.
picture, very well.
Okay, great. As Atlee said, I'm Terese Venus at the Technical University of Munich, and I'm discussing public acceptance of alternative hydropower solutions. So in our study, within the FIThydro project, we conducted a study to compare public perceptions of hydropower, specifically run-of-the-river hydropower, across the 4 case study regions. And our aim was to identify points of controversy and consensus among locals in the different regions. So to do so, we conducted surveys in the 4 case study regions and specifically within 4 case studies there. So in the Alpine region, we conducted surveys in Germany. In Iberia, we conducted surveys in Portugal, in Sweden, for Scandinavia, and in France. And each of these case study sites were selected based on proximity to a run-of-the-river hydropower plant, their presence in a hydropower region, and the use of ecological measures at the hydropower plant nearest to the interview sites. To conduct our surveys, we used the Q methodology as a guidance tool. And this methodology relies on a relatively small sample. And it also allowed us to identify and understand the range of perspectives within the sample that we interviewed. So rather than knowing what percentage of people hold a certain belief, we were able to see the perspective or the range of these beliefs. And so in implementation, we had locals rank different opinion statements about hydropower. These statements were taken from a literature review and also were validated at the FIThydro stakeholder workshops in Portugal and Sweden, and also piloted in Germany before being used in the surveys in the 4 case studies. And essentially, these statements were about the benefits, but also potentially negative perceptions of hydropower. And in the surveys, then you see here on the right in the figure, the question that the respondents were posed with: what do they think about hydropower in their region? And respondents were asked to rank the statements according to how much they agreed or disagreed with the statements. So at the top of the spectrum, we see that those that they agreed with most strongly, and at the bottom, those they most strongly disagreed with. The statement number here corresponds to the statement. So for example, statement 10, I do not want to live near a hydropower plant, was in this example distribution strongly disagreed with. And the number here corresponds to the ranking. So for our analysis, we used these rankings in a principal component analysis, and we extracted components or factors which represent unique perspectives towards hydropower. So here you can see how it worked in practice. The respondent had cards with each of the statements, and they were able to distribute them. And once they distributed them within this grid, we interviewed respondents to understand why they had these particular rankings, and also the extent to which they knew about alternative hydropower solutions. So when we extracted these perspectives, we identified 4 perspectives. And the first perspective was focused on maintaining regional control. So major themes for this perspective were ownership, energy security, prices, and subsidies. So in terms of ownership, they believed the owner of the hydropower plant determined how it was managed and also regional effects that they experienced in the area. The second perspective was focused on hydropower's contributions for fighting climate change. So this perspective believed that flexibility and energy storage were very important contributions of hydropower, and that also it should be viewed as an important component of economic development. The third perspective was focused on protecting natural ecosystems. And so here major themes were the free flow of rivers. And in the context of hydropower, that meant that respondents believed that hydropower should be as much as possible limited to certain river stretches or certain areas so as not to encourage hydropower development extensively, and also to promote fish protection and biodiversity. And finally, the fourth perspective was focused on promoting citizen well-being. And here the perspective focused on economic development and flood protection, as well as protecting recreational opportunities in the region. So perspectives 1 through 3 were found in all 4 of the case study regions, whereas perspective 4, with the focus on flood protection, was mainly unique to the Portuguese case study. And we believe that's because in recent years, in specifically the case study the case study region within Portugal, there were instances of flooding, and so that's why it was most likely more prominent in our study. So as I mentioned, one of the strengths of the method is that we could identify points of controversy and consensus across the regions. So here I'll take out a few points that were interesting findings. In this figure on the x-axis, we see the ranking of the statement in terms of how much they agree to disagree. And on the y-axis, we see the rankings from how controversial to how much of a consensus statement they were. So to highlight statement 12, this was a highly controversial statement. Rivers are meant to flow freely. Here we see perspectives 4, 1, and 2 all disagree, whereas perspective 3, with the focus on protecting natural ecosystems, they strongly agree. On the other side of the spectrum, the consensus statements, statement 2 was, I am concerned that hydropower negatively affects tourism. And here we find that all factors disagree with this statement. Other major important statements were related to ownership. So the most controversial statement, statement 20 at the top, was that hydropower plants should be owned by the state. And here we see a very wide distribution of beliefs there, or how much they agree with it. And at the other side, statement 23 was existing hydropower plants should be modernized before new ones are built. And this was highly agreed upon that this should be done. So the key findings of our study was that plant ownership was a major controversial theme across all regions. And this is important because ownership has implications for how permits are granted, as well as how electricity is labeled and marketed to consumers. And also related to the modernization of hydropower plants, the public is very strongly in favor of this, especially when it means an increase in ecological measures at hydropower plants. But our follow-up interviews revealed that there are many misconceptions about how these ecological measures work, which implies that there's a need for better monitoring of these ecological measures to in turn ensure that there's better communication about how these measures work and why they work. So if you're interested in further information about this study, please refer to our publication. Thank you.